Okay, thank you, Abigail, for a very clear exposition of what is a very abstract set of ideas. I think it was delivered in a really accessible manner, and I learned a lot from this talk, but also from the material you circulated previously. So just to aid the discussion, I've just prepared just a few ramblings. I'll try to keep my discussion comments to a minimum, 5 minutes or so, and then we can open up to questions if you like. So, the focus here on the talk on the ontological turn, I think it's symptomatic of a more general dissatisfaction, right, within social science since the 1970s and 80s of the dominance of linguistics, right? So within post-structuralist approaches. So Abigail, you've touched on some of the other literatures outside of anthropology that have started to grapple with the question of the non-human, the question of material agency. You've mentioned Latour, but I'd like to just throw in a few other scholars that might be of interest to people. Donna Haraway has been working with issues of hybridity for a long time. Karen Barrett. Science and technology studies is also an interesting avenue. New materialist thinking. All these kind of approaches have tried to take the question of the role of non-humans seriously in social life. And I think Descola is within that larger kind of general orientation. I was pleased to hear your emphasis on kind of assemblage thinking as kind of a methodological approach by which we can try to think beyond the taxonomies of naturalism. So I have about 4 kind of discussion points or just kind of provocations, some related to the talk, but some kind of slightly at a tangent. One, I would like to kind of raise the status of going beyond naturalism that Descola puts forward in his book. Because it seems to me, and I think he's quite honest in that regard, that he says, in his attempt to go beyond naturalism, he's actually still a naturalist, right? He's still faithful to naturalism. Tim Ingold has talked about this in their kind of back and forth. So my question I'd like to raise in that regard is, to what extent can a destruction, or a deconstruction rather, of this great divide between nature and culture, to what extent can it sufficiently transcend this dualism, right, through the very kind of methodological taxonomies of naturalism? So it's using naturalism, right, the taxonomies of naturalism, it's all very clear, right, in how it's categorized, to try to go beyond naturalism. Is this conceptually feasible? And if it is, or if we can imagine it as being feasible, what is lost by that? So significantly, what kind of critical political purchase is lost when we try to, say, for instance, assign electric pylons with political agency? Okay? To what extent does this open up dehumanization, or is there the potentiality for this within politics? So that would be one kind of provocation. Let me see if I've missed anything. So in terms of kind of this idea of trying to go beyond naturalism, right, while using the taxonomies of naturalism, I think Descola is explicitly trying to raise questions regarding the status of communication and the status of symbolic thought, right, in anthropology. So, and this kind of provokes me to ask you questions about translation, right, both conceptually and methodologically. So you've mentioned, well, so in a sense, like, indeed, like, a lot of this work that's coming out of this kind of new paradigm is trying to translate the extent to which non-humans speak to us, and to what extent we can indeed interpret dreams as concepts, or social effects as concepts. I think this is a really, really difficult problem, and it's in some ways I think it's an aesthetic question. I like your kind of acknowledgement of the difficulties of translation in your talk when you mentioned the concept of nature in the Thai context of Thamachat. So I'd be interested to hear some of the maybe problems you've had in your research trying to work with these two concepts, right? The tension you've encountered. Okay, so my third kind of question would be, or point of discussion would be, this question of overlapping modes of identification, right? So I think this is the most interesting part of what Descola is putting forward. Like he emphasizes that this ontological schema, it's not like so clean and neat, right? There's this overlap. And I think your emphasis on that was really, really interesting. Part of that kind of schema, I think, is partly, this might not be fair to Descola, but his kind of, maybe it's like a Levi-Straussian hangover, right? I know he was a student of Levi-Strauss, so I don't know what the extent that would be fair, but that was my kind of impression. So in terms of this idea of overlapping modes of identification, what I was really interested in was the extent to which you can say analogism can be said to overlap with naturalism in the context of Southeast Asia's social and political cosmologies. That, to me, that's what I'm particularly interested in when you were talking. I know there's been quite a bit of work within kind of the European tradition that links analogism, in Europe with an investigation of teleology, right? So the idea of the great chain of being within the context of pre-modern Europe. The metaphor that's used there, and you touch upon it at the beginning of your talk about the mechanistic metaphor, right? So seeing the universe as a machine, right? A kind of a clockwork universe. And I'm wondering within like a Hindu Buddhist cosmology, because this is not really my background, but I'm wondering what sort of metaphors are being deployed within this kind of ontology of anagalism, and to what extent can you find traces of that within naturalism, within like kind of techno-scientific regimes of naturalism in the Thai context or elsewhere in Southeast Asia. Okay, so I have the final point would be regarding this problem of teleology, right? This problem of purpose or of intention. I think it's a key problem when we're talking about agency of non-humans, right? We're talking about the agency of animals, jaguars, whatever, right? Infrastructure, material objects for that matter. So I think teleology remains a key kind of problem at the heart of the great divide, right? Between nature, the study of nature on the one hand, or right, human society on the other. And I would like to kind of press, or kind of just, I guess, remind us of the Kantian injunction, right? Of kind of the unavoidable barrier that exists in regards to teleology as kind of an unavoidable aspect of human life, right? Of social life, right? Seeking purpose, intention, the desire to plan for the future. And I would question us to be aware that to what extent going beyond nature and culture just reproduces a different type of dichotomy or dualism, a different kind of paradox. I think Kant shows quite clearly that this paradox, in some extent, and you mentioned it in your talk, right? That Descola, or you ground it in the mind-body dualism, and Kant will ground that in the dualism between objects and concepts. And he says this is the fundamental critical distinction that separates human sentience from sapience, right? So I would say there's something worthwhile there to hang on to at a political level, maintaining that distinction. And this opens up all kinds of questions in terms of the status of intelligence, right? What do we think to be intelligent, artificial intelligence? These are questions that are perhaps beyond the bounds of this discussion, but I like the emphasis that you were hinting at hybridity and these hybrid forms of collectivities. And I think you're quite right to say, that Latour emphasizes this more. But I know, they've had discussions, right, quite a lot about that. Okay, so sorry, I've taken up too much time. Maybe just open up for questions.
So, maybe. I can. Well, just comment. Maybe. Thank you very much for it's very complimentary what you said about Descola's approach, and you underlined some of the limits, of course, of them. So, what you say, the use of the category of naturalism to deconstruct naturalism. So, in a certain way, yes, and in a certain way, no, because I think it is what I explained, the deterrence through animism that allows him to understand naturalism. So they are not opposed. It's a logical. It's a logical relation, and but this is the way maybe we can criticize him as using naturalist categories is this kind of modelic reflection. So he's very he has a philosophical background. Philippe Descola. He was formed by philosophy and by Lévi-Strauss, who is a structuralist, so very modeling, he's looking at social structures, not social structure, but the stability of things, the model that shaped the human reality. So he's reasoning through at a certain level of social sciences, which is the models. And there is different possibilities of way of seeing. Some are more focus more in the observation, which is the case of Tim Ingold, who has the same. In fact, they both have the same conclusion of the same departure. Tim Ingold, he said that it's not possible to make differences between the biology and the culture. They are totally intertwined. So they have the common basis of this, but different ways to reach them. And I think the point of view of Tim Ingold is interesting to regard Descola's one, because he's more taking, maybe Descola take more emphasis in the category of spirits, of the mind, and Tim Ingold put more emphasis in the body, how the person, how the whether animal, whether human, are engaged in an environment and make the world. So he's interested in the movement, and Descola more the stability. So, well, from my point of view, it's very interesting to be inspired by both of them, in the way we can, the level of observation, very empirical, and sometimes the level of modeling that gives more general ideas to think of it. Yeah, and in fact, Descola, he went to anthropology because he saw that philosophy was too abstract, and finally, but it goes back. Yeah. So, and Ingold he was a biologist, I think. So he went to anthropology, and after, so he has totally different approach, very original too. So, but I know a bit less about Tim Ingold. So someone I know reproached him to only take in consideration the ontology of hunter and gatherers, and not the others. So, but maybe I think he takes the ontological approach of naturalism, of course. So of course, the overlapping of modes of cosmology, of modes of identification is, we have many things to do with this, especially, here in analogism and naturalism, but not. it's very interesting that what you said about the chain of beings, how we can apply this concept in other fields than the traditional one of anthropology, but in the construction of the technical objects, for example, or so this leads me to the idea of Bruno Latour. I didn't develop. Bruno Latour is so he studied the science practices, and the idea of the hybrids. There's no he said that we never have been moderns because we were never able to think the hybrids, and we always separate the objects that are technical and the objects that are natural. And he said, no, it's not possible anymore. And today the objects are very complex. Behind the car you have how do you say, a savant, a specialist who is studying, the prions and everything, OGM, genetic modified genetic organism are both, a mix of nature and techniques. So there is no pure object, and he said there has never been pure object. And that's why we have never been modern, because we have never been able to study these hybrids. So he made this proposition in 1986, I think, or in the 80s already. So he cut really with separation between nature and culture, dualism. He was also one of the first anthropologists to study something else than exotic societies, but he said that we have to study the moderns in the same way we study other type of societies. So it's also, I think, a very interesting approach, and the notion of network is very important. So you said the chain of beings, but there is something like that in Bruno Latour. He calls, so he takes seriously the role of non-human actors, and they give them a name as they are actants, and he tries to trace the networks of objects that make what is the social link. So the other point, you said, yeah, so I'm not sure to be able to answer the last one because it's very hard. It's the idea of physicality and interiority, which is the main, the departure of everything for Descola, this distinction between interiority and physicality. And of course, we can discuss this point. We can think of it. What does it mean? And it would be interesting here to see here also what is interiority, what is physicality in Southeast Asia, but in science everywhere. So, but well, it's an interesting alternative than the one of nature-culture dualism, of course. So maybe, I think one day we probably have also proposition, but I didn't elaborate them. But it's a way of it's a depart for reflections and more and observations also, So.
Okay. Should we take a few questions from the audience?
How would this kind of trend affect the study of culture in anthropology, you think? Now that objects can have its own culture, well, through human interpretation, especially, American cultural anthropology.
You said Southeast Asian culture?
This whole idea that Descola trying to, challenge this divide between nature, culture approach. How would this, affect the, study of culture and anthropology, especially in America,
So, for the, I think that there's many ways to well, there's the question of comparison. I don't know if you have, we don't have so much comparison in Southeast Asia. We have, we had in France, I know the anthropology, you have the book of Condominas, which is a bit comparative. You have maybe Zomia, which is kind of more comparative, but in a certain place, certain groups, examining certain groups. But we don't have developed so much comparative anthropology. So it would be interesting to have a point of departure, like nature, the question of nature, to have to think how, the diversity of natures in Southeast Asia, because it is seen through the naturalist point of view, all the ethnographic. So there is this possibility. I think another one for the study which seems important is maybe has to do with this contrast between physicality and interiority. So what is body? What is, what is this concept of vital force and potency? We still, we can, in fact, reread. I think the material are here already, but it's the lecture of them who can open, new kind of interpretations.
I think the reason why I asked was because this whole subject is not new at all in anthropological study, since Franz Boas. How would this differ from, let's say, cultural relativism? Well, I read some of Descola work, and he sort of, put forward his position that he is not proposing cultural relativism, right? But reading some of his work, I still don't quite get the difference. Since the location of study is still in so-called primitive society, right? Even though you're trying to, so to speak, challenge the dominant naturalism kind of power, but there's not much of a dialogue across the societies. My question is, how would his challenging idea and get across to the so-called scientific knowledge or philosophy, since what he's trying to do is to prove that people in local area define nature differently from the scientific group of peoples. But there's no really, the dialogue between all these groups. So how would this be a kind of challenge or contestation?
I think it's
the opposition between nature and culture is the foundation of social science till very recently. So the idea of integrating the non-humans is maybe the most important, but if you have to keep this in the anthropology, because anthropology focus, we speak of the non-humans, of course, but we didn't really fully took part of its agency. You will find in the ethnography many things regarding to that, but it's not the way you make anthropology at the beginning. All the approach or interpreting societies and the difference between societies. So maybe of course, there were many ethnography looking at these non-neurons, all these questions, but the fundamental principle was still there in the background, and I think it's important to cut with the beliefs of the discipline, that which was mainly naturalism. We cannot see the whole world through the filter of naturalism, and even it's difficult for Descola to. It's for us, for all of us, difficult to get rid of it. So you have many kind of currents who are studying more the subtlety between the social organization of animals and things like that, and the coexistence between species. So I think that the objects also are changing, and the question that how we look to our object is changing. It's kind of relativism of the universality of naturalism. It's an important proposition. So but you're right. I think that there is a continuity, of course, in the subject, and many, since Boas there, I talk about Morgan also, they were great anthropologists, of course, but they saw the thing that, at this period, for example, they were all evolutionists, because it was about paradigm, and all what they had, their very good material, they put it in this kind of modeling interpretation, and well, that's maybe the point of this kind of turn, is to be able to change a bit the main paradigm and the grid of interpretations, and well, let's see that what it will open. It already opens many new kinds of fieldwork too. Science laboratory, for example, who study infrastructure, for example. So it's quite good topic to, even if we can find tradition, of course, of studying infrastructure in anthropology, but probably it's not the same way that we do it now, and the same importance we give to this kind of actors of actors.
Can I just join in and maybe just a few words about perhaps where I think maybe a fruitful avenue might be for kind of starting a debate about non-human agency in the context of Southeast Asia. I mean, I think that the issue of metaphor is quite central to some of this, right? If we look at the way in which anarchalism, I guess, in the European context, right, this notion of essences and origins, right, firmly fixed within the identity of humans and non-humans, right, and how this is structured within the hierarchy, right? This whole idea of a great chain of being, which was the pre-modern cosmology of Europe before the scientific revolution. That never really gets eradicated in Europe, right? With the emergence of early modern science, there's still this residue of the teleological explanation, even in early, Galileo and early scientists trying to explain natural phenomenon in terms of like kind of cause and effect, very linear, right? And it's modeled on this notion of the universe as being a mechanism like a clock, right? And I think, to what extent are there metaphors in the Southeast Asian context when anarchalism encounters science for the first time, right? There might be stuff in terms of in the archives that we can look at, this kind of clash, and then how are explanations generated, what metaphors are deployed in the Southeast Asian context to maybe make sense of this kind of so-called foreign ontology. I don't know. So that's kind of what my initial thought was when I was hearing you talk, because I think there's emphasis on the side, right, in relation to anarchalism, but these hybrid forms of technoscience and Southeast Asia. And I think metaphor might be an interesting way of exploring that question. Just the initial kind of thoughts in my head. Any other questions?
Well, I could ask you a very easy one. Yeah, I just wondered if you could talk about the research, the ethnographic research you've been doing in Southeast Asia, what communities and territories you've been looking at.
Yeah, for me it's very interesting, in fact, because well, I did research before reading Descola, and after, so I can tell you some of the one of the main ideas. Well, it was interesting is that when I did Edinburgh, I saw people defining nature always in comparison with naturalism. So opposing, the scientific categories and explaining that there was something like a holistic conception of nature. But so always in regard to kind of justification, and it was impossible to get rid of a culturalist modes of justifying this conception of nature, because it was the culture of the Highlanders, close to nature, but animist close to nature. So animist close to nature is still evolutionist way of thinking, this relationship between nature and culture. So there was this this paradigm which was present, and in fact something which was really complex, of a way of living this relation to nature. The people were saying, we have spirits, we have things, we have others, and we always have to justify, but in an exotic way, re-enchanting the world with all these beings. And there's something which was a bit confusing with that. And I think with this proposition, for example, of analogism, it's, no, yeah, of course, there is different nature. We don't even have to, we have now a theory called saying that there is not a real nature and different interpretation of nature. It's not cultural different interpretation of nature, or relativism between societies, with one more close to nature and the other more technological. No, we are not in this paradigm anymore. We are in a more general framework which links local societies, territorialized microcosmos with macrocosmic orders, and there is interaction, political interactions, and conception of natures which are which enter into conflicts, of course, but it's a different way of seeing them. So I think it's very interesting also to be debarrassed, of the previous filter of hegemonic filter of naturalism.
So you were looking at Karen?
Sorry?
You were looking at Karen?
Yeah. Well, it was a moment where it was very, there was very important debate and social movements inside the Thai society about the question of preserving environment and the possibilities of delocalized also some communities. So many events inside the civil society, many people were concerned by this topic. So in fact, it was not the Karen, they were part of the discourse which were constructed in this question, around this question of nature. They were not the center of it. They intertwine into a larger context of discourse on this question of nature.
You weren't looking at their ontology specifically, but how they fit into a broader title.
Yeah, well, I'm in between, but I now regard my material differently, because I also entered in their specific, we would say, cosmology, how they relate to non-humans, for example, and the question of nature. That, you know, if we look at it, they don't have name for nature. They don't have concepts. So there is this work you said of translation, and they were engaged in a huge work of translation and to put their vernacular concepts of relating to non-humans in to contextualize them in regard to the naturalist paradigm, and to say that we can make relation that, for example, you know, we protect that we have tutelary spirits living in the protected sources, watersheds, and they define some, which is the equivalent, you know, of sensitive protected areas. They describe their conception of soul like an ecosystem, you know, a relation of all the beings living in the same ecosystem, and all the species are interdependent. So there was this, you know, this passing of concept, and by themselves, we can say that they integrate also the conception of external conception that were a bit imposed to them, and so that's why it's interesting. I think I don't see my material in the same way now.
Can I just ask something very, very quickly?
Yeah.
Can you just explain again the difference between worldviews and worldview?
Yeah. So worldviews, it refers to the postmodern, you know, paradigm. So the postmodern current of anthropology focus on the, you know, we try to be in certain way to take seriously the point of view of the person, the indigenous. So it's the relativity of the point of view of, worldling is another level of thinking. It's not the, you know, the relativity of, you know, I'm French, I will see the world like this. I am Karen, I will see the world like this. No, it's this point of observatory where you, it's another level, yeah. It's the way you put, you say, this, what is the world composed? What kind of beings and what kind of abilities, properties they have? Are they, you know, do they have a consciousness? Do they have a consciousness? Do they have a subjectivity? It's what he calls, there's a different expression for this used by Descola, the modes of identification, that you infer that this kind of being has certain properties. So the two most important coordinates of this process is the contrast between interiorities and physicality. But, well, it's a way to identify things in relation to other. So I am in front of an object which has no soul. I am in front of an object with a consciousness, and the relation I will have with this subject will be, of course, different. So this is when the worldling is how you attribute, you know, certain qualities to the object of your environments. And after the making of collectives is why we find, things put together in certain places and not in others. And this have implications in the modes of relation we develop, like predation, like domestication of animals. And if you see in the world that, for example, the domestication of animal, the idea to preserve and to protect the animal is different in certain places. So in South America, you have this difficulty of, the other is very near to you. But, the whole world is made of souls. So if you eat the other, you eat yourself. So how to put, differences between the relationship is quite different. And well, it's this idea. So that's why it's naturalism is, to think about this distribution of proprieties. There's many declination, but it's not infinite. That's why he proposed these 4 ontologies: naturalism, analogism, animism, and totemism. And inside we can use them, as big models. I don't know, big categories to think, to study these different modes of making identities and making relation between these identities.
Actually, also follow up from these 4 categories, no? About animism, analogism, naturalism, and totemism. I think this scheme, or I think it's interesting. I think that kind of giving some framework or make me understand more how to classify. But then it will be also, like you say, at the end also about, somebody say that it should be called hierarchy animism, right? Michel Salin or?
Kaj Arem and Guidos Kai Arem, I think we pronounce.
Yeah.
And Guido Sprenger also was the coordinate, the co-coordinate the book,
Yeah.
so I don't know so much which one is.
Yeah, so it means that it's the same as this structuralism in the past, right? That sometimes separate into 2, black and white, like that. But at the end, we found that there are a lot of shades and many colors after that. So in this 4, it means that maybe the 4 models, but actually, like the current that you show also, it's you explain in terms of some animism, some analogism, something like that, So I'm not sure this is okay for scheme, but when you do field work, it can be, you talk a lot, because physicality and interiority now also separate to make this matrix, right? So when you study, it can be many things, many ontological ontology scheme or concept can come up. Is it like that? So what the use is just to provide a model, but when there will be many concepts after that, to modify this. There is one that there can be many concepts, and another one also. I'm not sure, like animism can change to naturalism in terms of, I'm thinking, right or wrong, I don't know. If the current people, in some group before there are more animism, making that ritual sacrifice like that, but later they can apply the new concept of nature, which is maybe more scientific one. So that can be the development of this way of looking at the nature. Is it like that? so that it has to explain more, right? Using all the concept to see how it's changing. So it's not fixed as it is, mixing and also developing, right, like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's of course in a practical way, it's always difficult when you have if I take the example of the Karen, or the analogist or the animist, I think they look like more analogist than animist, which was a bit hurting me at the beginning because we were so. It was so usual, to use this conception of animism. So to get rid of it like this, it's not, and to use analogism subtly, it's not, well, it has to, it's a process, of course. And I'm still wondering about this. I'm not, well, but it's not the most important point. I think that what you say, so the concept of ontology, I think the way Descola put it, it's really the inference of the four modes of identification. He doesn't, what he distinguishes is the modes of relation. So in animism, you can have different kind of animism. If you look at the modes of relation, like perspectivism. Perspectivism is observed by Viveros de Castro, Eduardo Viveros de Castro, but it's not very pregnant in Descola fieldwork. There is not so much perspectivism. It's more, there is some particularities of perspectivism, but it's not as developed as Eduardo de Castro described it. So, yeah, we can develop more about these sorts of animism, and that's what Kaj Harem proposed in a certain way with hierarchical animism, which reflect the relation with the spirits in Southeast Asia, which is very important, more than wild animals. And the relation of animism in Southeast Asia should be sought also around, this topic, and it's something that we can further develop with Descola himself, And for the idea of ontology, I'm not sure to be able to answer to you. The feeling I have sometimes is that, for Descola, it's a higher category, of making this inference between continuities and discontinuities, between interiority and physicality. But sometimes when I read some people, I think that there is as many ontologies as they have social groups. So sometimes it overlapped, and it's more by ontologies they call this way of studying, to focus more on this relation with non-humans. This is sure, and to investigate the cosmologies, because there is a big return in anthropology to the cosmologies. So they are more localized, and but I don't think it's the definition he gives, and that there is, from his position, there is not an infinite possibility of combining the two. There is this one, and inside, of course, maybe, but this is not the approach of others. If you look at Bruno Latour, if you look at Tim Ingold, for instance, you can find other ways of thinking, because I feel also intricate sometimes, to be too much in the model. I need to take all the inspiration of and who are more stick to observation and following, the networks of relation between all these humans and non-humans.
I have a question.
Yeah.
May I?
Yeah, of course.
If you switch back to one of the slides, there's a rice paddy, and Korean man is killing a chicken. That's one. I assume this is the animist village, but I was in a Catholic village. Interesting past. And then the rice paddy was just like that. But then that year that I was there with students, they were all yellowish. And the Catholic priest used his cross and walked over and did exactly something like that. But instead of killing chicken, he used the cross and say prayers and so on and so forth. And that was interesting. So I would like to hear your comment on that in comparison with this here. In terms of Ajahn Bobby said something, the last point of his comments on hybridity and so on and so forth. But this is exactly what's going on here, in the city and around the city here. And secondly, if you could a little bit more explain Latour's life of things, because there's a lady here. She did her dissertation on indigo, but from a very traditional village once. But then the traditional village has changed, and then she followed the indigos, from the perspective of villagers. But then she always said, if I ask her and quiz her on her explanation more on connection and so on, she said, just go back to Latour and read his life of things, and then you understand. But I never understood that, you see. So as I understand now a little bit more, Latour worked on factory, right? On base.
On fact.
Yeah, on factory, on industrial factories or something. Yeah, and then that is totally different from, more traditional indigo made or collected by the local people in the traditional way. However, after it leaves the village, yes, it takes on what the new technology would. So I don't understand the connection of that. If you could explain and help me. Thank you very much.
To become to first question about the sacrifice and the conversion of the Karen people to Catholicism. So of course the Catholics they fight against animist practice, but in a certain way also they tolerate. It's a complex exchange, but they tolerate some of them. It was difficult to get rid of them. So what I saw also is maybe it's there's two domains which is intriguing. Is that I talk about the concept of multiple soul. So for Catholics, you have the reduction to one soul. So many Karen they talk about this reduction, and then they talk about the soul of the heart. So there is some disappearing, of course, conception. It changed the relation to spirits. That has to be purified from the places. And they gave kind of a substitute rituals to enter kind of modernity, education, and things like that, and to manage the relation with ancestors. But in the background, they are still here, so you can find some practice of sacrifice, of sharing in the food together. But with Catholic elements, and they are still mixing this animist or analogist, I don't know, okay, reference. So it's not a totally, it's a kind of maybe hybridation also. And to come back to Latour, and so The Life of Things is not a book from Apadurai, I'm not sure. It's the biography of objects. And Latour, he has two main, his books, We Have Never Been Modern, and the new one, the last one is Modes of Existence. So it's like modes of beings for Descola. So Latour is very difficult to read. It's in French, so I don't know how is it in English. I really, you have to read a lot to be able to understand at the end what he means. So, but he deepens. He wrote a more recent book on Gaia, and which is more accessible, but it's not so easy to enter in Latour. So I understand that it's a bit tough to start. So Latour, it's the network, the actor network theory, which has to be looking to. She should look at to pay attention to that, and there is who is this anthropologist who made the operative chain, chaîne opératoire, we say in French. It's in the field of the anthropology of techniques, and it's when you follow somebody, indigo or anything in all the intertwined field of the human science, the intertwined field of society, objects, and the process, of tracing, when it's girls that are making certain part of the work, and after it passes to another place, and you traces all the sequences of the work. So this is an old idea, but you find this kind of approach in Latour, but applied to very modern objects. So that's why it's interesting to look at his work more in detail, to find this, a way to study the networks of that which are implied in indigo, and even now the transformation with synthesized material and things like that for this kind of material. There is a book in French written by a French anthropologist, Abigaël Pesses, but it's in French. Maybe she wrote some article in English. You can.
We take maybe one or two final questions, if there are any from the audience. Yes, please.
So, ontology, cosmology. Ontology is the mechanism, of inferring, the qualities of interiority and physicality to certain beings. It's the mode of identification, and it's a more, there's four possible combinations identified in the ontology. Cosmology is the specific articulation. I go back to your question, but it answer to this. It's, the ontology is the analogical tool. Cosmology are the instantiations. So the concretization, this kind of combination, these possibilities, how they concretize in a certain context. So this is for the first question. For the second question, yeah, I put it. You're right, totally right about Tim Ingold. He's opposing. He doesn't use the concept of ontology, but prefers ontogenesis, which, focus more on the process of development of the organism. But he's really part of this debate in certain way, or what we call the anthropology of nature. That's why I put him with the other, because he's one of the main thinkers today with Latour and Descola and him, who discuss this in different positions toward what is called the ontological turn, but it's just an appellation, but he's part of it, and he criticized. Descola for him is not an observator. He's more like he said that the people who make anthropology in rooms are. It's a bit unjust because he really passed a long time among the Ashwa, and I'm not sure that everybody is able to live many years in this place and to do the work he has done. So he's an anthropologist, but he considers that comparison is very important too. So, and when we are too much sick to our fieldwork, we just forget to propose more analysis of the material. About Tim Ingold, what did you say? That he said ontogenesis, and there was something. Yeah. Yeah. It deals a lot with this idea of phenomenological approach of opening, how we are engaged in the world, and so the theoretical position is not the same. He's not reflecting from an ontological view. He's really inside the person, the animal, or this point of view. So
I just think that point connects nicely to what you did. It's just you meant on Descola's more rationalist approach. Very I think he's working out of like white men, right? At least from my impression. Can we maybe take one more question? I know
yeah.
a little bit over time. Is there maybe one final question?
Sure. Anyone with a really pressing question? Maybe one more. We're a bit late, but.
I would like to ask Ajahn Thanabe, what do you think of Descola?
Yes, I have been a little bit different from Descola, but I'm much concerned with the, say, nature and culture debates. And since the people in Manchester in the 1970s, Martin Stratton and others, very much big debates, nature and culture. So the within the social anthropology is not so much influenced by the Frankfurt anthropology. In 1970s and 80s and to some extent in 90s as well. So I haven't been familiar with the nature and culture debates in Frankfurt anthropology, but recently I came across the Beberos, the Castora, and also the what's his name? Some anthropologists and sociologists in France, including Bruno Latour. Bruno Latour AMT is much more similar to the social anthropological studies as well. And because of this, the focus is much more laid on interrelations and interactions as well. So the Descola and of course his supervisor, Levi Strauss, as a rather say ontological aspect of the beings, including the animals and the plants and so on and so on. So to my mind, in our anthropology, which may be called social anthropology or something like that, is much more concerned with the interactions and the relations and these kind of things. So I'm not fully accept these Descola's arguments, but very much interested in these animism and what he called animist ontology and its interiority and this kind of things. So I think your arguments in order to apply the say scheme of analytic scheme of Descola to the ethnographic instances you come across in Southeast Asia, especially in Thailand. I think I appreciate your attempts in that position. But what struck me in relation to your analysis of spirit position and sacrifice, maybe you know some arguments, my arguments, and the spirit position and the sacrifice. I think if we are concerned with the spirit position, I think you sometimes mentioned the hierarchically ordered the relations of beings within the world. That the spirit and humans and so on and so on. Of course, we can identify these hierarchically ordered relations and systems which may represent the spirit position. go more directly the world and the spirit position and this kind of things. But if we look at these many cases of spirit position, what is evident in the practices is much more concerned with more, say, affect and affection and position and this kind of things. Especially we use we may be concerned with the notion of the passion or passion and this kind of things. This is totally different from the action. Certainly not active, but the passive. So the spirit mediums and the body is much more passive, and so what is evident in that phenomenon, and also the interaction with the spirit and the mediums is much more concerned with this the passion. The passion is it is not the action, but the receiving everything, others into one's body, and the medium of the body. This kind of the process is quite interesting in the analysis of this ontological aspect of the spirit position and so on. So this aspect may be considered in terms of this ontological analysis of human practices. Perhaps we have to look at the other interactions and the relationship between spirit mediums and also the animals and the things. So many say materiality and also the object. This kind of network may be quite important to making this space and space of the spirit mediumship as well. So we have to going back to the Brun Ratou's AMT as well. So I think there are many possibilities to develop this argument, mainly, which is mainly concerned with the ontological aspect. But we may be concerned with the interactions in the analysis of the ontology as well. That is my impression of your your talk today. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Delabe. So, just I would like to comment. 2 comments on what you proposed. I think indeed that the question of sacrifice and possession has to be investigated more because it's a lot more complex. Descola, he knows better the Amazonian case, which put emphasis on metamorphosis. And he has a tendency to say that, so metamorphosis is the particularity of Amazonian animism, and possession the characteristic of analogism, because you have these particles of body, external particles that can go inside you, and in fact you don't find some cases of possession in different places. It touches the idea of collectives, what are the collectives made of, and how they can relate to each other. But maybe do we have kind of metamorphosis here? Yeah, you know, we should question this in more details. And also, I know that in your work you propose alternative definition of sacrifice, and that's the definition Descola start with is very inspired from Lévi-Strauss approach, and I think he will be very interested, you know, if we can, you know, develop this concept and to further investigate these two interesting points of possession and sacrifice. So it will be I think for the workshop, a very interesting topic to deal with and to have further discussions with him also, you know.
Okay, I think we're slowly approaching to lunchtime. Everyone must be hungry. So could you please join me in thanking Abigail for an excellent and thought-provoking discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.